Everybody. I'm just going to talk today about a subject that most people, at least in the Western world, try to avoid or, just don't really want to talk about it, don't want to think about it. They know it's coming and they don't understand it or it's a bit scary, so better leave that until you have to deal with it. And at least in some of the Eastern traditions, they talk about it, they prepare for it, and while they're going through it, they actually talk to their loved ones and coach them through the process. I bet you know what I'm talking about. It's right in the title. I'm talking about death. What a word, right? I mean, couldn't it have a nicer, more gentle sounding word than death? There's something very, very final about the Western concept of death. You live this life, this is your only life, and if you're good, you go to heaven forever, and if you're bad, you go to hell forever. And I think some of the Christian doctrines even say if you die before you're baptized, you go to purgatory. So all those innocent baby souls that never made it to their first baptism would be lost somewhere in purgatory forever, ever, neither heaven nor hell. You know from some of my earlier videos what I think about that because I was raised in Catholic schools and chose to go to a Jesuit university. The university not for religious reasons, more for the arts. And studying the Bible and the Quran and comparative religions. So I wasn't indoctrinated when I chose to go to a Jesuit university, and I wasn't part of their philosophy or their religion, but as a child being raised in a Catholic church and a Catholic school, I was. So back to the topic at hand, and that's the big D word, death. My first experience with death, because I didn't have any pets from the age of birth to 6 that died. We had a couple of dogs in the house, and I hadn't seen them die. And my parents never sat me down and said, before we send you to school, first grade, Catholic school, we need to talk to you about death because they're going to scare the bejesus out of you. And on the first day of first grade, sitting in my first uniform in a green-gray room with a green-gray desk, in walked a very scary old lady dressed in black from the top of her head down to the floor, even covering her toes. It was the old-fashioned black habit, and in between her knees, hanging from her waist, was a large wooden cross that swung left and right as she took her steps into the room. I was absolutely terrified just seeing my first teacher on the first day of school in Catholic school, because I'd come from, kindergarten, where you wear normal clothes and they wear normal clothes and you play, you sing, you laugh, you eat, you sleep, you take naps, and you try not to get in trouble stealing other kids' toys, into this extremely serious environment. And the first thing she taught us on our first day, and I'm not making this up, I'm sure a lot of you are going to remember this. This is going to bring back memories for you. Is that we are born sinners. We are born evil. And that in order to become good and go to heaven after we die, we have to go to church at least once a week, and we have to take confession once a week. My school was very old-fashioned in the Chicago neighborhoods, and these children go to church for Mass on Wednesday, then they go on Sunday with their families, and then they go to confession on Friday. So every couple of days we are going into the church to atone for our natural state of being, which is sinful and evil. That wasn't the worst part. The part that really upset me and my family was that she then went on to explain to a class of 6-year-olds on their first day of school, sitting in rows and rows of desks in their little tiny uniforms, that you will all die. Everything dies. Everyone dies. Your parents will die. Your friends will die. Your pets will die. You will die. Now, I'm sure that she had the best of intentions to frighten us into church, into prayer, into right action, into confession, with the thought of death hanging over us and living in a perpetual hell afterwards if we didn't confess our sins, didn't go to church, didn't practice correct action. So her intentions could have been, I don't know, positive? Would you call that positive, to terrify children into coercion? Personally, I wouldn't, but I'm sure she felt like she was doing the right thing. And that night, when I was supposed to be sleeping, I was just sobbing my eyes out. And my mom heard me crying and came in and sat on the bed and said, "Oh my gosh, what's wrong? Was it a terrible first day of school? Did anybody bully you? Was anybody mean to you?" You know, the kind of normal things parents would ask a child who is sobbing after their first day in school. And the only thing I could say to her was, "No, the kids were nice." "Well, then why are you crying?" And I said, "Because you're going to die. Daddy's going to die." And then I named my brothers and sisters and my dog. They're all going to die and be gone forever. I'll never be able to see them again. Now, that's a really difficult way for a parent to approach the topic of death with a 5 to 6-year-old child. And she did explain to me that she was not going to die for a very long time, and my dad wasn't going to die for a very long time. Pets die sooner, and my brothers and sisters shouldn't die for a very long time. Do you know, in all that time that I was discussing this with her, I never cried because I was going to die. That didn't matter to a child who's not old enough to reason things out yet, just trying to figure out the world that they're living in and the rules of that world and how things work. The scariest thing wasn't that I was going to die. The scariest thing was that my caregivers, the people who love me and take care of me and make my existence possible, were going to die and leave me forever. Now, of course, we managed to get through it, and I grew up relatively unharmed. I got out of Catholic school as soon as possible. I begged my parents to put me into the public school, which was cheaper and closer to my house, and all my friends went to by the middle of 3rd grade. So I was very, very fortunate to get out, basically, because it was very, very uncomfortable living in an environment where there was so much evil and so much negativity and so much fear-mongering. But living in England, decades later, I decided that I didn't want to take on the responsibility of teaching my child the Bible stories, so I very innocently put her into Sunday school. While I was in church in England with my friends, I'd go about once a month to an Anglican church. She was baptized Anglican with an English father, and she started coming out frightened. She's only 4. They start Bible school, Sunday school at the age of 4 because they put them in reception or kindergarten at the age of 4, and they start 1st grade at the age of 5. It's always 1 year earlier in England. So I decided to skip church with my neighbors in our little village with a church from I think the steeple and the inside of the church was from 800 AD, 900 AD. It was beautiful, with a few bits added on the outside after that, around 1200 AD. The new refurbishments go back to 1200. And I decided to sit in and listen to how her Sunday school was being presented to her. And there was a very scary lady who was a self-proclaimed missionary who was trying to frighten the children into becoming good little Christians. This is not Catholicism. This is not Catholic. This is Anglican, which, we even had female vicars giving services. So they're extremely modern in their approach to Christianity. But here were children, 40 years later, being frightened just like I had been. I had to take her out when around Christmas 2004. She said, wow, Mommy, all those people, 250,000 at least, who were drowned by this tsunami of 2004 around Christmas Day, maybe the day after or the day before, were really bad people. And I said, well, why would you think they were bad people? And she said, because that's how God kills people, when he's mad at them. And then she told me about the flood and Noah's Ark. So that was it. We were done. She was not going to be indoctrinated and brainwashed anymore that if a group of people are the victims of a tsunami or a flood, they are obviously evil because God wanted to kill them. So we don't really have in the Western world a comfortable relationship with death. Death is not something that we are taught to either accept or even in some Buddhist traditions look forward to. You know that line from Peter Pan where he's looking at Hook and Hook has got him by the neck and he's about to kill him, stab him, whatever. And he says, go on, death is a very great adventure. And of course, that shocks Hook, so he doesn't do it because he's so startled and shocked by that statement, and Pan wriggles away and escapes. Think of that. Think of somebody saying, death is a very great adventure. Well, the fact of the matter is, it is. I'm not going to say look forward to it, or rush to it, or run to it. But I grew up in the Middle East, the West Indies, and the United States. My father worked with an American oil company. My parents split up when I was 11, so I would go spend time with my dad in whatever country he was placed, and then I would go spend time with my mom in the Chicago suburbs. So as a child growing up, I had the best of all worlds, really, especially in terms of culture and seeing other religious traditions, which is probably why I went on to study comparative world religions, because I was an American Catholic Christian as a teenager and as a young woman growing up in the Middle East. We lived in a relatively large suburb of Cairo called Maadi. And we had everybody in that suburb. It was, a really mixed community of Westerners, Egyptians, and other Middle Easterners. And in 1977, when I was 17 years old, we were preparing to go take a boat ride and a train ride down to Aswan and through Luxor. So the oil companies back then used to just take all of their employees, send them to the company doctor, who was an Egyptian doctor but working in a company office with a couple of nurses, and they would just immunize the crap out of us. Every year we got immunizations and boosters, not only for everything you guys got in America, but we were also thrown in there yellow fever, smallpox, hepatitis. All of these were added to our boosters. So I walked into the company office, which just looked like an office block, but had medical equipment, a doctor, a couple of nurses running around, and stood in line ready to get just a tetanus booster shot. And unfortunately, today you can get a tetanus toxoid, which is a tetanus on its own, so that you don't have an allergic reaction to the diphtheria and the pertussis that they add in there. So back then they didn't have tetanus toxoid, so they just gave me a booster in my arm of DT, diphtheria tetanus. And my arm burned. As soon as that shot went in, I could feel the liquid moving through my arm, burning like fire. And I looked at my arm, and it turned wherever the serum went, turned my skin bright, bright, bright red. And I went, oh my gosh, that really hurts. And I believe the doctor said something like, oh, don't worry, it just means you have really strong immunity to either diphtheria or tetanus, and your body's just reacting to it. It'll calm down. You know, like they say, oh, you'll get a fever, or you'll feel unwell, or the injection site will be sore for a short period of time after a booster shot. So I took a few steps out of the office into the hallway, and that's it. That's all I remember. I do remember everything going very quickly black while I was still conscious and in my body. And the sound of the people waiting in the office just went very far away from me, like down a tunnel, although I didn't see a tunnel. And the next thing I know, I'm looking down on the body of a young teenage girl laying on an examination table, sleeping, apparently sleeping, with doctors and nurses running all over the place, a man standing over her crying, patting her head rather roughly, but trying to be gentle and speaking to her. And I could hear the actual words where he was saying, wake up, Eileen, come on, talk to me, over and over again. And I watched as the doctor did CPR and shouted to the nurse, go to my car and get my bag out of the trunk. So the nurse left the room, and a few minutes later, the doctor stopped doing CPR and said to the man standing at the head of the teenage girl on the table, she's not coming back quick enough. I have to go. And he ran out of the room and left this middle-aged man sobbing over the body of a young girl on a table, an examination table, fully clothed, who appeared to be sleeping or dead. Now, the really fascinating parts are, well, let me just start with a description of how I saw this. I was floating under the ceiling, I would say about 6 feet above the examination table, exactly in the position that my body was lying below me. So my head was floating above my head, and my arms were above my arms, and I was face down. So the body on the table, which was technically dead, was face up, and I was mirroring that body face down from the ceiling, or from slightly above the ceiling. If you think about it, it appeared to be about 6 to 8 feet away between me and the body. And from an examination table, I guess that would be about the ceiling level. I saw everything through a brown haze. That's the only way I can describe it. It was like a little brown fog. It wasn't scary. It wasn't dark. There was light, but it was like looking through a brown cloud. And I remember the color specifically. It was light brown, and it didn't bother me. Here's the really interesting part. Watching the body on the table didn't bother me. Watching the doctor try to resuscitate with CPR, the body on the table didn't bother me. Watching the man cry over the body on the table piqued my interest, but didn't really bother me. I wasn't like, oh my God, I need to get back in that body as soon as possible to stop that man from crying. The fascinating part is I was consciously aware of everything going on in that room. I could see everything in the room, and I could hear everything that they were doing, but I had no emotional response to it. It didn't scare me. It didn't hurt. It didn't make me sad. It didn't make me panic. It didn't make me happy. I wasn't like, woohoo, here I go, heaven, here I come. And I wasn't like, oh my God, I got to get back in my body. There was no emotional response. But I wasn't like negatively disconnected. Like, oh, terrible things are going on, but I just don't care. It wasn't like that. It was complete peace, complete calm, and it didn't matter if that girl on the table who I didn't realize was me, because while I was floating above her, I didn't really know who I was. That was a shock to my soul and spirit, the bit of my soul and spirit that's in this physical body had a shock because it came out extremely quickly and couldn't get back in. So you're talking, bam, instant astral traveling with no cord. The cord is cut. There's no way back in. And the reason that happened was because I experienced anaphylaxis, or anaphylactic shock is what they call it. And it's when you are so highly allergic to something, which we later found out in a hospital in London through allergy testing was the diphtheria portion of that shot. I had had so many boosters for tetanus, living overseas and coming into contact with rusty nails and, bits of broken fence and whatever, that the diphtheria portion, I had been over immunized with diphtheria, and my body completely shut down instantly. No respiration, no breathing, no heartbeat, no circulation of the blood, probably the end waves of a normal death in the brain, but the doctor didn't have anything to hook up to my brain to see if I had any brain waves. What I reported back to them later that they did and that they said was spot on. It was 100% accurate. So they were convinced that I was watching from the ceiling, and I was convinced that I was watching from the ceiling. So it doesn't matter now if any expert goes, well, you weren't really watching from the ceiling. You were inside your head listening. No. So the whole point of this is that I was really, really lucky. At such an early age, the age of 17, I got to experience a very short clinical death. Was it 3 minutes? Was it 5 minutes? Yes, I was resuscitated. I had a shot of adrenaline and CPR, and the doctor was asking me to speak to him, and I said to him, "Let me go." Those are the only words I said, and turned my head away from him. So apparently my soul liked the freedom of floating around on that ceiling and was like, hey, I'm not coming back in here. And for what reason? I didn't have a negative life experience. I had no reason to leave this body, this life, this planet, except for the fact that it felt very free. Being free, consciousness floating freely is a really, really, really good feeling. And so I think that's why I said, let me go. I certainly didn't hear music. I didn't see Jesus. I didn't see angels. I didn't see loved dead ones who had passed before me, like my grandparents. I didn't see a tunnel. I didn't see a light. I never made it out of that doctor's office. I never made it out of that room. I went from the ceiling of that room, boom, back into my body. And I didn't feel it. It didn't hurt. I didn't see it happen. I can't remember it. I have no idea how I got from the ceiling one moment into my body and opening my eyes the next moment. I wish I had. I wish I could have experienced the process. But, in a quantum world, it might be so instantaneous that there is nothing to experience. It happens instantly. And I did open my eyes and start to talk to my father and the doctor after I received a second shot of adrenaline and was told to lay flat, not even sit up, for 7 or 8 hours, or I would risk having a heart attack, because he was frightened when I said, let me go, that I was not going to come back, and he was going to have a dead teenager in his office due to a diphtheria tetanus booster. And he gave me the second shot of adrenaline, which is twice as much that the human body can actually tolerate. But hey, I was 17, young, fit, strong heart, so I just laid there. I did test it out when the doctor wasn't looking. I lifted a leg up from the table, and it shook like crazy. So the adrenaline was definitely coursing through my body, and there's no way I could sit up with that much adrenaline in my system. My dad sat with me for 8 hours and got me juice and water, no food. And I remember him walking me from the office into the car and from the car into our apartment. And I could barely walk up one flight of steps. I was so weak. And I think I was weak from the adrenaline shots. I don't think I was weak from the near death or the death experience. I think it was those darn 2 shots of adrenaline that just made it really difficult to climb the stairs afterwards. My legs were like noodles that had been worked out, for a week on the treadmill, so now they can't walk anymore. It felt like that. Maybe I feel lucky to have experienced it and survived it at such an early age, because it really changed who I am and who I became, because it gave me, like many, many people who experienced the near-death experience, it gave me a driving desire to understand life, and a desire to understand God, and a desire to understand humanness, human consciousness, and the human relationship to God, or the human relationship to life and divinity, all of it. It just really fueled my fire to study formally and informally, to learn as much as I possibly could before I actually get to experience floating out of this body again, but this time not returning to this particular body here and now. So I read as much as I could find on the near-death experience in ancient religious texts as well as current articles and books. And that included the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, some of the ancient Indian texts, as much as I could find in true translations of the Sanskrit and the Sumerian texts, not all hyped up with Sitchin, but the Oxford University Press translations. Just trying to get a feel for what people have said for thousands and thousands of years about death and dying, because this near-death experience is nothing new. It's something that humans have been experiencing forever. So I was hoping to garner some wisdom from all areas of metaphysics, science, and religion, and philosophy. And I have to say that one of the best writers, well, there's really two, but I'll talk about one of the best writers that I found on the near-death experience by far is P.M.H. Atwater. I'll drop some links to the books. They'll probably pop up with Amazon. I'm not promoting Amazon, but at least you can see some of the books from this particular author, who literally spent decades studying near-death experiences as told by the men, women, and children from all different cultures and all different religions and all different ages who had actually experienced it. So the criteria for being interviewed was it had to be a medically documented near-death experience. There are many, many more that people have outside of a hospital setting or away from a doctor, but you can't really prove those. And the one that I'm talking about is called Near-Death Experiences, The Rest of the Story, What They Teach Us About Living and Dying and Our True Purpose. And that's by P.M.H. Atwater. It's kind of a dry book, but it's really interesting because it tries to keep an objective reporting of what the people who experienced it say. Instead of saying, I think this happens after death and I believe this, and trying to prove a theory, it basically explains to you, it summarizes the outcome of over 4,000 individuals who were interviewed to find out what was different about their experience and what was shared commonalities. Because we figure that if a lot of people who have never met, never communicated, have the exact same experience in a particular setting doing something like dying, then chances are we're all going to share that. because it's common. It's reported across ages, sex, regions, nationalities, languages, religions. So I think that's the best way to get a good understanding of the process of what happens when you die, at least in the immediate time period before coming back. Have been cases reported of one I even know of personally where somebody was in a coma for an extended period of time and actually reported very similar experiences, thoughts, feelings, visions, hearing, talking to various different people like a near-death experience, but they were either in a coma for a long period of time or on life support or both. Even though their body wasn't technically completely dead, they were experiencing something very similar, if not identical, to the near-death experience, but for a much longer period of time. And after interviewing over 4,000 people over decades, there are some really striking statistical facts being reported by these 4,000 plus people. And I think you should read the book. I think it will be an eye-opener for you and will give you some comfort in knowing that the process itself is not only painless, but is pleasant, and that life actually does exist. You exist after the death of your physical body. That is an absolute fact. And in reading this book, I think you'll come to the same conclusion. But I'll just go over a couple of the similarities here, the most important ones that I took out of the book. And some of those similarities or striking differences are that children who were clinically dead and then resuscitated never, ever, ever reported a bad experience. They all experience a heaven-like process where they report music and flying and feeling free and maybe seeing loved ones, or angels are often reported by children, things that are pleasant to them. And that is 100% of the time, according to Atwater's research. Adults will often report seeing a dead loved one who preceded them, who died before them, angels, or the religious figure that is most important to them. So Christians report seeing Jesus, actually talking to Jesus face to face. Buddhists report seeing Buddha and having a personal experience with Buddha. And Muslims report seeing Muhammad. And so it goes on, because there's many subdivisions of religious figures within the big religions. And whomever they have a personal connection with while they're alive, somebody they love, admire, respect, want to emulate, wish to see someday, wish to be like, they often report having actually seen and spoken with that person. And many times that religious figure gives them comfort. Adults, about 15%, that's 15%, will experience a negative, hellish, or hell-like place first. So we've got 85% who experience a pleasant, lovely, heaven-like experience, but 15% experience a place more like hell, dark, frightening, filled with negative energy, or even negative entities that can't quite be seen or made out, and it evokes a fear response in the person experiencing that. But what's equally interesting is that 100% of those individuals eventually make it to a heaven-like place and experience the tunnel, the light, the music, the angels, the revered religious leaders, and their loved ones who passed before them. They also get to a heaven-like place. So nobody in her studies reported going to a hellish-like place and staying there until they were resuscitated or revived. And that's a very comforting thing to know. Yeah, I found comfort in that. I hope you do too. Or I'm sure you would have turned off this video by now. You wouldn't still be listening. So you've got children only experiencing heaven. You've got 85% of adults only experiencing heaven, and 15% first experiencing hell but making it to heaven very, very quickly. Now, here's the catch. Why is it that 15% experienced a hellish place before getting to a heaven-like place? And why do 85% experience only a heaven-like place? It is tied 100% to what the person thought they deserved. Okay, again, this is so important to understand this part. What these people experienced during their time outside of their physical body while their physical body was clinically dead and their consciousness was free to move out of the area or proximity of their physical body was determined 100% based on what they thought they deserved to experience. So if we just analyze that a little bit, that means that the person who, robs people's money, steals out of their car, breaks their windows. If that person thinks I'm living in a society that does not give me the same opportunities to actually make money to support myself and my family, if they justified what they did to others 100% in their own mind and thought, it's not really my fault what I'm doing, I deserve to go to heaven, then during their near-death experience, they actually went or they go to a heaven-like place. I mean, that could include a sociopath or a psychopath who actually commits murder and says, well, that person deserved it, not my fault, I'm going to heaven. And if they believe in their heart of hearts 100% that they deserve to go to heaven, then when they have their separation from their body and they're brought back, if they are brought back, they will report that they went to a heaven-like place. Conversely, that means that if somebody is carrying around a tremendous amount of guilt, like we Catholics, good Catholics are taught how to carry guilt, and a heck of a lot of it. If you are a good person, you do nothing majorly wrong, you make a few human mistakes, but you feel so guilty about the mistakes you've made that you think you deserve to go to hell, then if for any reason you experience a medical separation of your consciousness and your life from your body, that's what you will come back and report. That's what they are coming back and reporting, that even though they were good people, they felt they deserved to go to hell. So what they experienced was a hellish place first, but then they make it to a heaven-like place eventually, if their NDE goes on that far, that they actually get to experience both. There aren't many religious texts that say you will experience after this life exactly what you expect to experience, what you believe in, what you think you deserve, and what you believe exists. So that would mean that somebody who has been taught about no religion and no hell might literally just experience kind of a soothing, calm emptiness after they leave their body. Whereas other people, based on their religious beliefs, what they've been indoctrinated with and what they've picked up along the way in their lifetime, because we're here judging constantly. Every second of the day, we judge. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Do I like that person? Do I want to eat white bread or brown bread today? We're constantly judging. So in a lifetime, you get to pick up your own belief systems and you get to throw out some of the indoctrination that you just don't want to carry around anymore, and you get to pick up the new. So there is a choice in that. It's not 100% what people put into your head or your heart is what you will experience. It's what you're willing to let into your head and your heart, and what you're willing to carry around and believe in that you will ultimately experience. So I'm going to go to that big crystal library in the sky with unlimited knowledge, unlimited books and videos, and plenty of coffee. And I am just going to study, 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 study in between lifetimes. Because that's where I really get my joy outside of the most important joy in my life, being a parent, being a wife, being a daughter, being a mother, being a neighbor, being a friend, being somebody's child. My relationships are the most important things to me, and they bring me the most challenges, certainly, and they bring me the most joy. But outside of that, get me a good cup of coffee and a lot of good books and a lot of good videos, and I could literally just sit for hours devouring whatever information they contain. So it's like, okay, maybe you love horses, and outside of the relationships that are key and number one in your life, maybe you just want to be out there in a field with a bunch of horses that you can ride and groom and feed and just be with. And for somebody else, maybe it's boating, or, everybody, we're so similar because we're all human, and we are so different because we are ultimately our own spirit, our own pieces of soul, pieces of the universe, pieces of God, pieces of creation that are having a human experience on planet Earth in the 21st century. It is all related because it's all about consciousness. It's all about you and your consciousness and your experience here in matter on planet Earth in the 21st century, and whether you're going to steer that consciousness and have the life that you want and have the death that you want, the life in between lives, we should call it, because the death is the process of leaving the body. But once consciousness is free of the body, it's no longer dead. It's no longer dying. It's not death. It is literally living as consciousness, your consciousness, you, in between lifetimes. So the in-between has got to be as wonderful and creative and special as the actual lifetimes themselves, maybe even more so, who knows? You're not encumbered with the rules and the laws of matter. So you can fly. I did. I didn't fly far, I only flew up to the ceiling, but I was as lighter than air. So please pick up that book if you want to know more about what over 4,000 people report on their death and dying experience and their time in between lifetimes. And the only other book I was going to mention is Anita Moorjani's Dying to Be Me, because it's a beautiful 200-page book, and it's very popular. And what's really interesting about that is not so much her experience in between lifetimes, but being told while she was over on the other side, and her physical body here was absolutely riddled with tumors and cancer that were not survivable. Being told over there that she could come back if she wanted to. And she said, no, I can't. I don't have a body to return to. It's done. It's finished. And they said, no, it's not. Not if you don't want it to be. And she's like, okay. This is a doctor who wrote this book, and a researcher. And she comes back, and sure enough, within weeks or months, all of her tumors are gone. Her cancer is completely reversed, and she becomes a vibrant, healthy, physical-bodied woman again. And that is an awesome book. It's called Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani. And that's more about the power of your soul, which expresses itself through your mind and your heart, your feelings and your thoughts, and those steer your actions. So it really, that book is about the power of your soul to do anything, accomplish anything, and physically change matter. And the other book by PMH Atwater is about the time spent in between lifetimes. And the fact that you don't die, I know that. I can guarantee you 100% right here and right now, you never die. Well, I can't say never because I haven't gotten to infinity yet, so I don't know if a soul kind of dies, if it's reabsorbed with God or creation, or I don't know what the end point of this journey actually is. I just know that when this physical body that you're currently in on earth, using your ears to listen to me through this video right now, the you that is hearing this does not die. That I can guarantee and promise you. Why? Because I died. I died and I wasn't dead. My consciousness was still there to experience the whole death process. I didn't get very far. I didn't get to heaven, but I certainly would have gone to heaven. I don't think I deserve anything negative, so I'm never going to try out that hellish place first and then get to heaven. I'm going straight to heaven and straight to that library, and I hope I see you all there. So how does all of this tie into the event and the Mandela Effect? Well, the other videos that I've done on the event go into great detail on my philosophy of the event from a metaphysical and a religious and a historical and a quantum viewpoint of it. It's opinion, it's not fact, but people like hearing other people's opinions. I certainly do. They help me to formulate my own. And those videos really talk about the event being a process of ascension, a process of atonement, a process of living in a much higher frequency as a much more compassionate and cooperative person, being, entity. I mean, with a body or without a body. So, does the event have to mean that we take our physical 3D bodies and we take them with us into 5D? Probably not. I can't imagine scientifically, logically, that a 3-dimensional body would function well in a 5D environment. Does that mean that our physical bodies at the time of the event instantly transform into 5D bodies so that we can live comfortably in a 5D earth? Possibly. Or is this a process like evolution, like the growth of a human child into a human adult? A gradual process of becoming more and more compassionate, caring, loving, nurturing, forgiving in your own soul, so that you no longer fit in a world that isn't compassionate and loving, nurturing, and forgiving. So that your soul is evolving gradually to a point where it no longer sits comfortably in a 3D body, in a 3D world. Well, I tend to think that that's more logical, that from a quantum perspective of energy and matter, that it makes more sense that the spirit, which is an energy and inhibiting inside of the matter, is growing and expanding and learning to the point where it's no longer comfortable living in a 3D material body, and it needs a higher state, a higher frequency body in order to learn and grow and live and continue on this incredible, never-ending path of ascension and atonement. Many people say that the purpose of the ascension and the atonement and the end destination is going back to God. That we are little fragments of God that splintered off in order to experience God. God's eyes on the universe. Part of God in the universe to experience, fully experience the universe. And some say that part of that process is forgetting who we really are. And then we have to make the journey back to God. And we do that in a gradual, evolutionary, step-by-step process with, if you look at spontaneous evolution in animals and plants here on the planet, it doesn't have to happen gradually over time. Occasionally, it can happen instantly. And occasionally things happen instantly when you have the 100th monkey effect. When you have enough people within a soul group understanding something, boom, the whole soul group gets to understand it and experience it without the long drawn-out process of figuring it all out. So logically speaking, chances are, if we're headed for 5D Earth, and then after that 6D Earth and 7D Earth, and on and on and on and on into infinity until we are one again with God, then yes, we are going to need to shed our bodies along the way so that we can inhabit more comfortable bodies, bodies that serve our energy better and serve our purposes better as we grow. And that brings us to the Mandela Effect, because matter changing right in front of you with the residual evidence of how it was, along with the actual evidence of how it is now, is simply, in my opinion, an expansion of awareness, an expansion of memory, an expansion of consciousness. You're one of the lucky few, and the numbers are growing and growing and growing every day worldwide. You're one of the lucky few who can hold on to a lot of memory. You can hold on to the past memory of how things used to be, and you can hold on to the memory of how they are today. So, and you can hold on to the memory of the in-betweens when things shift and jump back and forth for a while. You know, they kind of flip-flop on us. And now we're holding all those memories of all the different states of being of that particular thing or person or product, movie, music, logo, book, whatever. You're a keeper of the memories. And I have a video on that if you want to explore that a little bit more. And that's a very important thing to be. You know, you have the memory from your birth until your death of how matter has fluctuated and changed. And that is simply, I think, to wake you up to the fact that mind is over matter. It is mind over matter. Mind rules matter, and heart rules matter. So if you know that, you might as well start directing the whole show. The ruling elite have figured all of this out with all of their money, their connections, their science. Maybe they've figured out how this works. Maybe that's the reason why they keep the majority of people in a state of poverty and fear. Because if everybody knew how this works, then they wouldn't be so elite anymore. They would lose their control mechanisms. They'd lose their power. You might as well start directing the matter around you in your personal environment and in your shared environment with intention, the way you want it to be. Instead of being the victim of those who have already figured this out. They know how matter works, and they are ruling the matter for you. So you might as well get in the driver's seat now, and you might as well start driving the bus. It's your bus, it's your matter, and you might as well start taking it with intention to exactly where you want it to go and how you want it to be. More on that in future videos.